Jacked Up Review Show. It's a Jacked Up Review Show. Jacked Up Review Show. It's a Jacked Up Review Show.
Join us as we cover many an insane movie and numerous cult TV phenomenons. Are you ready to get jacked up? Are you with us? Then listen on.
Listener discretion is advised. It's a Jacked Up Review Show. It's a Jacked Up Review Show. Jacked Up Review Show. It's a Jacked Up Review Show. It's a Jacked Up Review Show. Jacked Up Review Show.
Unpredictable,
You want to get in some trouble?
I'm up for that.
unconventional,
What did you do when you went outside?
I went to work. Beep, beep. I went to work. Beep, beep.
uncompromising.
You understand me now? You understand me now? Yeah.
Experience the phenomenal character-driven series that redefined drama.
You'll be an old man by the time you get out.
Sipowicz, he's unique.
Well, you're gonna learn about some consequences.
Where do you think that anxiety's coming from?
Spain.
But a good detective?
Yeah.
Oh, there you have it.
Here we go. Just wait.
Let's go.
Just wait, it's not enough.
NYPD Blue, weeknights 1/12 Central, right here on HNI.
And welcoming to the show, not Captain Kirk Asher and Kyle Asher.
We do that to Kyle sometimes. Thanks to South Park.
Thanks to South Park.
Yeah, I've been getting that my whole life. I don't mind it. It could be worse.
And I get Captain Kirk from anyone over the age of 40. So it's pretty great.
Oh, God. So speaking of South Park, we're talking about another controversial show. We are talking about David Milch and Stephen Bochco's NYPD Blue. So I just did a Kirk there. So what got you guys into edgy action, crime, mystery drama shows?
Well, I mean, I don't want to speak exactly for Kyle, but I will right now. When we were younger, I think our dad started watching NYPD Blue when we were not super young, but too young to really should be watching it. And so it was kind of on.
That was the same.
Yeah,
Reruns of it would be on Court TV before it was True TV. I'm like, wow, I thought Comedy Central was the only one playing, uncut, not free, safe to air. I just heard all kinds of language.
Yeah,
and content.
Yeah, I think it was kind of just on in the background, and then when we got older and it got to streaming services, and I think I was buying the DVDs for our father, that when we started watching it seriously, kind of just appreciating it. I know, Kyle, you got into Deadwood pretty hard, right?
Yeah. So I got into Deadwood before NYPD Blue, and then randomly, I think I was talking to our dad about the show, and then I was like, "Oh yeah, this guy David Milch is a part of it." And he's like, "Oh, that's the same guy who was a part of NYPD Blue." And then, yeah, I like my brother. I mean, it was always on in the background growing up. I don't remember episodes from then, but I just remember like it being on.
Yeah. All that fancy music. And all kinds of people have been on it. It's like, it's basically, you can spot a future The Practice or Breaking Bad casting call. There's every once in a while a Star Trek or Law and Order actor.
Parks and Rec. Early episodes.
Yeah, I was so glad when you guys mentioned the Adam Scott one, and I showed that to my sister. I'm like, oh my God, does he age? And the same reaction as you guys. I'm like, yeah, I don't think he ages. I think.
I just watched an episode that had Octavia Spencer in it.
That was great. She's on another Bochco show later on, Raising the Bar, where she's like the bailiff, and it's just so cool seeing her on that versus this, because like in both appearances on both these shows, she like is able to mix in like some persona and some off-color kind of comedy without even saying much. And it's like that's some great talent. I can totally see why she was a future award winner.
Oh yeah, and that's like, I think when we talk about it, that's one thing we always notice, like in certain scenes, like those actors that did go on to do bigger things, when they were in those scenes, you were like, wow, like they drove that scene at such a young age or at such a beginning part of their career. Like it was interesting to watch.
1,000%. Yeah.
There was a runner with Anna Gunn where like early season, and we're just like, holy crap, like that was a long time ago. And Anna Gunn is holding up not a very large part, but it's very important to what's happening, because I remember she was kind of in not an informant, but she was involved in the case with John Kelly and not John Kelly, shoot, am I missing? John Kelly, then John Clark. John Clark's at the end, John Kelly's at the beginning.
Yeah, it's an interesting transition, but it was cool seeing her on this in the practice. And then, I finally saw Deadwood this year. It was one of those, I meant to always see it in college, but instead I was watching this and Sopranos, and still had my share of edgy TV along with The Wire and The Shield and 24. And so it's like, this all rang together. It's like, I'm watching as much edgy shit as I can watch that is still very emotionally and thrillingly rewarding. And like you say, it was always kind of just one of those, you just stumble onto it and you're just like, oh, okay. To go back to your question, because you said like what gets you into edgier drama shows. I think what happened is because Kyle and I don't want to, once again speaking for him, I think we're both fans of like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, South Park, pretty like, because even some episodes of Sunny are not allowed on Hulu anymore, like pretty edgy, controversial stuff. But we would watch our dramas like Breaking Bad and The Wire, and Kyle loved Deadwood and stuff. But I think we also really enjoy comedy, and that's something that happens in NYPD Blue kind of subtly a lot. There's a lot of really funny, sarcastic humor amongst these characters that kind of gets lost in people remembering like, oh, well, there was a lot of side boob and man ass and a lot of racial slurs. It's like, yeah, but there's also a lot of really funny, sarcastic jokes underneath all that. That totally.
Kind of just go right past.
And I see other people who gave it up after either Caruso or Jimmy Smits left, and I was like, for real? I mean, there's so much other stuff in this. Like, I think most people who did see it all the way through did appreciate it, but there were some who just, for whatever reason, they were just like David Milch loyalists. They're like, oh, he left, so it has no more edge. I'm like, well, there's all these like 7 other writers who are also picking up the slack and doing the stories. So way to shit on them, dude. I mean, Matt Olmstead, who works in the Botchko factory for a while, and well, what do you know? He's part of the One Chicago, Dick Wolf universe now. So it's just like, and I just find it even funnier how some of these guys end up appearing in other franchises like The Closer as well as Bosch. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, you've talked about some of it already, but it is interesting. It's like, I think this was their training. And I even went through Homicide recently. I'd always seen parts of it through the Law and Order spinoffs, but I didn't, it just wasn't on TV all that much. By the time you got to the 2000s, you had to buy the expensive DVDs. And it's just so funny how they remastered it for Shout Factory. And I got into a predicament. I'm like, do I find this edgier, or do I still think Blue is the OG? And it's like, because, this came after Homicide, but it's just hard. It's just like, it's 2 parts of the same coin for me. Like, because that one is just really good at having interrogations and just, again, you got John Munch, who's later on SVU, and he's just fucking hysterical. But yeah, like Blue is even better at just doing kind of what even later shows like Longmire and The Closer do, where just like you got the whole just blunt energy and you instantly know what's on everyone's mind before they even walk in the room and get told to get out, And like you guys say, it is like it's able to do a lot of these cliches without making it be a really atrocious soap opera. Like they're just so good at just being very natural and in the moment. And I mean, same thing with Deadwood, where it's like that could have easily been who's who Western Town. Come on down to Western Town, and it's like the anti-Western, where it's just like you are seeing just how everyone is lacking in empathy and diseased with smallpox, and it's how ironic that all these guns for punishment and hard asses, essentially the only time they come together is when a kid is injured, and
yeah, it's the best stuff. Like, I don't know, it's just something
it's
about
the
it.
best.
It's the
Like,
best.
Yeah, like
So-
thinking about I think it's also like the story that they made too, like especially those beginning seasons of Blue. Like,
Yeah, they ditched the saxophone after a while and actually kind of go for just like some just even more hard hitting music, and what themes you can get from Mike Post's albums that he scores for various songs are worth it. But it's like, yeah, I wish there was a complete soundtrack to this, because this just gets me in a mood, like to go jogging around the block, even though I'm not in anywhere close to a New York type city.
You talk about the music. I always find it funny, and we don't talk about it on our podcast enough, is just how funny some of those transitions music were. Because they always tried to have like the same kind of feel, but then but then randomly an episode will begin and it's like straight up like techno, where it's just like all of a sudden like computer beats and I'm like, what? And then it'll cut in with the random footage of New York, and it was like, well, I guess they just wanted to be a little different on that one. They have to make 100 episodes, so might as well.
I think they were being cute after a while, and then after a while it's like that. My only issue is like when, don't get me wrong, Danny Lux is a pretty good music composer in his own right. He's done Boston Legal and a bunch of other stuff, but there are some times in later seasons, it's a small blemish, but it's like sometimes they'll start and end pretty rapidly, and you're like, whoa, that was a pretty rough sound thing. Did no one get the cue that they didn't have enough B-roll of New York before cutting to the next scene?
Well, that was something that comes up with NYPD Blue, basically with anything that was made before HD rewatchable stuff, where at no point did they think when making the second season of NYPD Blue that people would be rewatching it in their homes on repeat. So like random stuff that you're like, oh, that'll just go by the wayside, no one will pay attention. It's like, well, no, I mean, when I'm watching it on Hulu for the third time this week, like I'm gonna notice that you didn't take the time to make sure that was actually correct. Like it's funny. I remember,
especially the last few seasons, where you're just noticing is like that all that stock footage is like, it's not anywhere close to being shot in the same footage as the new footage. So you just gotta say, okay, it's their final year. It's still a pretty kick-ass show, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I'm actually watching the final year right now, and that whole year is based on a soundstage. Or based on a backlot. Or a backlot. That's all it is.
Yeah, and
it's not a real city street anymore.
No.
Well, they knew it was going to end by that point, right? It wasn't that kind of like.
I think they did get something from the network. They were caving to the pressure of just more, FCC fines, and it got to where. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah. The only thing I definitely remember, because when I found this out, I was like, that makes sense. They interviewed, I think it was Dennis Franz, and they asked him, like, I want to say season 4 or 5, like, how long do you think this is going to go? And his response was like, 12 is good. Like, it wasn't even like, I'll be done at 12. It was just like, 12 is good. And I think they got to 12 and we're like, this is as good as we're going to get. So let's just ride off into the night.
It started dropping off in viewership, like heavily.
A little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, and also, and better shows and other newer shows started coming out. So, it's just like all good things end, It
also lost the Zach Morris factor, because we were all super stoked to have Zach Attack on NYPD Blue, but after 4 years, we were like, it's good, we're good.
It is interesting how it's like just the most unusual guys always playing the partners. You got future Kyle Rittenhouse Biller, Ricky Schroeder.
I'll be honest with you, Cam. I was like, because I don't know, like we met today. I don't know your politics. I don't know how you feel, but I was like, God, I hope he doesn't like Ricky Schroeder like we don't, because it's fun to shit on that guy lately.
and he's a good actor, but don't get me wrong. It does seem like recently I have heard how he's been like arrested like supermarkets for like being a dick to like people in public. So I don't know. It's another, like you say, kind of like with various music artists, you know, separate the artist from the talent, but it's like, damn, it is hard. Regardless of which side of the oyster you're on, just because like you'll always have that. You'll always have someone who's just like misbehaving on set. And I mean, you guys talked about it enough with Caruso, where it's like I would always hear cool stuff about him, and then like he was like every actor who like worked with him was like, oh, he's intense, he's great. Like, but then there's other people who's like, yeah, God, I could not get him to say that fucking line.
Well, Kyle,
Caruso, I just love the balls of like you have one good year on a TV show and you're like, I should have movies now. Like, it's just crazy. Like it's just.
And I thought he was a decent actor because like my intro to him was seeing the first Rambo, and it's like, okay, so he's played cops for years. He's in Proof of Life with Russell Crowe as a cocky mercenary, and then he's just been in a bunch of other TV made for video movies that, as in addition to his big, you know, epic fail in '95. And this like, what was happening? Was he really just that impossible and he just had to take a step back? But yeah, I mean, he did another show called Michael Hayes, and I can't ever find any clips of that aren't in German. And I mean, CSI Miami was a whole different oyster, where it's just like, okay, so he's doing his whole Miami Vice, you know, take, but for CSI. You know.
I mean, we did not give Dave Caruso, we didn't give him a fair treatment. I'll say that. Like we went through the whole.
But it was pretty funny how you went around on the podcast, because you're talking about also how you're. It's just impossible to not notice. It's like, yeah, I can tell they were sick of him around there versus here, and you know.
It's also
he was so good, but he was so good in that first season too.
Oh yeah,
like that's what's also somewhat frustrating. I mean, you would never have Bobby Simone if it wasn't.
And what a way to go out on! You hire a hack lawyer played by what's his name, who's just who was also difficult apparently to work with. Bochco said he would invite him, and he was one of those. He was like kind of a method actor. He wanted to be in the zone, but he wanted to spend time in his own place, taking a dump or something. He's like, no, we're going to fly you out here. And, you know, James Sinclair character played by.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, you're going to come here and you're going to go with the hotel we've given you, and you're going to stop being a crybaby. Same kind of deal. And that's why his appearances are also spread out. I guess he learned his lesson. People know I'm being difficult. I better.
Well, because I read the book, True Blue, written by, I think it was Milch and Bill Clark, the guy who was a consultant. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was great because they're talking about Caruso, and I guess he only had one outburst in front of Dennis Franz, who then had a private conversation with him, and then he never did it on Dennis Franz's time again. So it makes it makes me think like, man, if only they were a little bit harder on him. Like, hey, we get it. Like, this show is going to do well. You're going to do well, but just tighten up so that we can make more seasons of this. But instead, he's like, I'm going to go fly away. And we're like, cool. We'll bring in Jimmy Smits. We'll still be awesome. We'll still crank out like great episodes of the show. But I think I always feel bad because it's like going into the podcast, we knew that. We knew he was going to leave like unceremoniously, and bring in like one of my favorite characters, Bobby Simone. So I was like, I just want to get rid of you so I can get to those happy times.
The best moment. Yeah, I'm like, the same way. I'm exactly the same way with. I think it is like Prison Break, where it's like I just forward to the actual prison breakage now that I've seen it all. Same thing with 24. It's like I don't want to deal with Kim Bowers, so guess what? I'm doing my own fan edit. We're gonna skip those 5 minutes of her saying, you know, it's like any Leroy Jenkins moments. Nah, appreciate it. Just get the fuck out of here. Yeah.
Just want to get to the good stuff.
Kirk may not remember this growing up because he was younger, but I vividly remember like our household being a Bobby Simone household.
Really? Sweet.
I remember when my parents would talk about NYPD Blue, like and you would be like, oh, but like, because I remember when CSI Miami started to get popular, and I mentioned like, oh, wasn't that guy like on Blue? I'm like, I remember my mom being like, only for a year, and then Sipowicz and Simone ran for a while or something like that, like something, and it was just like, but like the hatred for Caruso's character, it lives in some people who like watched it then, you know, like it's really interesting. And I just vaguely remember both my parents being a Simone household for sure.
It's wild how everyone basically had, I call it the 3 different shades of Botchko. Is like, if you weren't watching Doogie Howser or NYPD, then, you know, my mother was more of the Hill Street, you know, blues lot, and my father saw a bunch of LA Law and then, you know, gave it up after like season 3 or 5, where he's like, this is getting old. But it's just so funny how we see, all the actors and just newer stuff now. We're always just joking. It's like, oh, but what about their heartthrob, you know, role that really immortalized them in the world of TV. And like you say, it is like, I would always see parts of this modified for TNT, and you guys brought up some great points, and I had no idea. I was like, that Amazon had the DVD versions, while Hulu sometimes would play like the TNT safe to air reruns. And I was like, wow, okay. So I wondered why some episodes were shorter, but Amazon eventually took it off. So I had to finish it on Hulu a few years back. And it was interesting too, because like you guys said, like this show is just blooming back and forth in terms of popularity. I was at a crappy airport job, and I introduced a coworker to episodes they hadn't seen, and they were really digging it. But H&I, Heroes and Icon TV, is currently still, I think, on occasion replaying it. I don't think so much now post BLM. I think they wanted to change it up a bit or have it be on a later day. But I still appreciate what they do. They play all kinds of obscure shows like Nash Bridges and The Pretender to all the Star Treks, and it's just cool and how they remaster it. And they were kind of doing exactly this. Is like they were playing more what you can play on cable TV now, but they would still, you know, censor out some of the language or censor the middle fingers and nudity. But it's like, okay, but still, you know, was always kind of a PG-15 show. I never thought it was R-rated, and at the same time, it wasn't exactly PG-13. So it's that you know, divine predicting cable TV is like, well, you choose what you want to watch in your household, but it's not for, like you say, you've illustrated all perfectly on your podcast on how this is a show kind of just showing office politics. And it's just so ironic because the show itself is totally about office politics. You got lieutenants and captains who do not respect each other. I even appreciate it even more seeing Lana Parrilla from 24 and Once Upon a Time here as a officer female officer who's kind of got some bigotry in her department, and she's being judged based on her merits as a woman. I really lit up when I saw then unknown martial artist Michael J. White as Fancy's younger brother. And you guys illustrated it, how he's basically reassigned by his shitty sergeant, and Fancy's like, how about I either embarrass you or you resign? Take it. And
it's
great.
What's insane about the show, because I'll say 2 things, because you mentioned 2 things that are like I have very different thoughts on. One, it's one thing that kind of sucks about NYPD Blue. It's so good. Like, I think you can't really deny how good it is if you sit down and watch it.
I've seen people try, and you're just like, don't you do that. Don't you try.
They're wrong. I mean, we could say that.
They are sadly mistaken.
But like, it has an archiving problem, because when shows buy it now, it seems they can only get the syndication edits, which is what the big problem is, because they'll take an episode that was an hour and a half long when it aired, and they're like, this needs to be 45 minutes with the other shows. So they'll cut out a lot of stuff. And like the biggest example, the 2 biggest examples are Hearts and Souls, which is the final episode of Bobby Simone, which if you watch the syndication edit, basically no one in that department cares that he's dying. It's just Sipowicz. It's just his wife. Like, they don't even talk to Medavoy or Martinez or Kirkendall.
Illogical.
So
100%. 100%.
I can understand cutting out the Greg Medavoy scenes, because like you guys, you got a tolerance factor, and there are just some days where you're just like, get laid, Greg, get laid, get out of here.
Get out of here, please. But that creates this issue where if you want to watch NYPD Blue the way it was, you have to get the DVDs. And we have a listener from Australia who's like, we just don't have them. Like, we cannot get them. I have to pirate them. I always say it weird. I have to pirate them. And when I do, sometimes I don't get the right ones. They're like mirror or whatever. But if you watch it on Hulu, sure, it looks great in high definition, and it's suddenly in letterbox, but you're missing out on a lot of good stuff. Like, you're missing out on a lot of the things that make the show great. So it just sucks that it needs enough support to get the nerds to be like, no, you need to archive this right. You need to put the full version up.
I mean, it makes sense. Hulu's, co-owned by Fox and Universal, so it's like, so they're definitely going to the ABC vault. But when I got to I think post season 4 on Prime, it got very annoying. The resolution I was seeing, I'm just seeing too much full screen resolution. I'm just like, damn it, because this is
also also the audio. Like, sometimes I'll break out the DVDs. I'll break out the DVDs to play, and it's like, man, the audio is horrible. Like, I can't understand what anyone's saying, and the music is mixed so weird.
Especially when it's outside scenes in New York City.
Yeah,
I think it's like a sign of the technology and the times.
Okay, so you're getting some similar stuff to Hulu also has St. Elsewhere on there, and it's funny because once in a while you'll see kind of a tracking blurb pop up on the screen, or just something clearly showing that the tape's been played too many times, and it's like, funny. It's like, that's just the Twilight Zone, same way on Paramount Plus. Back when it was CBS, I tried it out, and it was interesting seeing, it's like, okay, this one's clearly been copied to a digital videotape form one too many times, and these, I can buy that this is an HD TV presentation of an old, broadcast, but it depended, because that's another show. It's like, there's some episodes they will not release just because, I don't know, they just were too freaky to certain people, and same kind of thing here. It's like this was at the height, and it's just, they were on a roll, and then I guess after season 4 is like, you could only get it on Apple to buy or rent, and like you say, it's just that the DVD sales were low, even though the audience was there, and it's like, well, the longer you wait, and finally Shout Factory coughed up the rest, but it's like, that's ridiculous. It really is. It's like, there's an audience, you release everything, you will always have a second stage of fans.
And the other thing that I wanted to touch on, because you talked about kind of the controversy of the show and inner office politics, and I don't know if Kyle would agree, but now in a post BLM camera phone world, and I wish I remembered the name. There was a guy who I don't know if he listened to our show, but he did tweet about our show once. He was like a guy writing reviews for NYPD Blue when it was coming out on message boards in the early 90s.
Oh, sweet.
And he became a writer for, I think, Rolling Stone or somewhere, a TV critic. And he wrote an article a couple of, I want to say a year or two ago, about how NYPD Blue is hard to watch now in a PC conscious world, because NYPD Blue always has this attitude of, look, the cops, they're rough around the edges. Maybe they don't say the right thing or do the right thing, but they always get the right guy. But it's like, that's not the truth.
That's not even what the show's even implying. It's implying that, okay, everyone's going to have various consequences here and there.
And it gets kind of, and we have our run-ins with folks who are very supportive of the police, which they are allowed to be. But we have run-ins on certain comments on the show where it's like, we just hate on cops and we're anti this, and it's like, no.
The thing I'll push back against that is, I don't think we've ever been unsupportive of police.
No, not at all.
If as a society we deem being a cop a job and people have to do it, I want to support them the best way possible. I want everyone to be alive. I don't want anyone to lose life. But the way I view it, no one else's opinion here but mine, the way we are doing policing, there's something wrong. And we just like to challenge that every now and then and just like to think about it.
Because there's moments in NYPD Blue where they'll be like, yeah, we can get the warrant, or we can just go. Like, that happens so many times in episodes where they're just like, we could do it the right way.
And I mean, there's even that book called NYPD Blue Lies, and it's like, I've been meaning to read that one for a while, but I mean, I think it was already good enough that I saw a BuzzFeed one, I think of circa 2016, and it was just showing basically, yes, I mean, it goes back to the whole, just like how much racism is systematic. Those who grow up elite, hate people beneath them. Those who grow up in like the hood basically fear any elites or any kind of authority figure. And it's the same kind of deal here, where it's just like, okay, well, yes, we need police, but they need to do it the right way. And at the same time, those who don't want to better themselves, they're going to get caught and probably fired or prosecuted, and then, put back on the job and not corrected. And it's interesting how, like you say, I encountered that in a few of the groups, including other great shows like Line of Duty and Bosch. I had one where it's like, Line of Duty is basically the internal affairs in Britain, showing what a police state it is. And it's like every once in a while you get someone say, oh, this show's so anti-cop. I'm like, no, it's just showing a political turmoil. That's what it's showing. But same deal with, Bosch. I saw some people saying, oh, that's one of the few cop shows that's not woke. I'm like, what the fuck does that even mean? So it's showing progressive and corruption in the LA District Attorney's office, which, again, is also kind of a harsh reality. But like you say, it's like anytime it's like people are just, again, they're the Star Wars generation. They think everything is black and white, good versus evil. It's that easy. It's like, no, that's why it's awesome. It's the gray area.
What color lightsaber does the cop have is the biggest question.
Yeah.
Like, is the cop's lightsaber green or red?
Right.
I think that's
purple
why
or blue. And it might as well be blue since it's about cops. But I mean, even Star Trek was on the same time, and it in Babylon 5. I mean, basically space cops on space stations. It's like, but it's just the format. People can't get past the format, so they just want to just act like everything is that mundane. When it's like, no, your head is up your ass. Please go take a hike.
Kyle, what were you gonna say?
I think that's why the show, I think that's why this show kind of holds on and is able to still be played years later, because a lot of the things that come up in the show are still like prevalent to what's going on now. And like you did say, and like you were saying, it isn't black and white. At the end of some episodes, there isn't this like perfect ending where like the cop admits he's wrong or the other person admits they're wrong. There's this ending where they're both still admitting that the other one's wrong, and we just move on to the next day. And like it is what it is. Yeah, and I think that's why people can like shows like that more, because like that's
and it's realistic. Like I do mobile security, so obviously any job you're in, someone's going to make an inappropriate joke. I had, again, an old timer boomer essentially basically make a remark, oh, I'm in Inward Town. I'm like, oh my God, you're such a cunt. But hey, you do the job and no one talks to you, so it is what it is. I can try correcting you, but you don't listen to anyone anyway, so it's not going to work. But
I wanted to say also about, because we talk about how like you can watch it even now and the issues are there, but that's why I think the character of Sipowicz, who basically the show became about, through people leaving, and then it's like, okay,
that's his whole progression. Will he make amends? Will he get back together with his family? His troubled wife, his son who wants to be a cop. And the second stages of his career when, he decides to mentor the other cops who are just not playing by the rules, and he becomes less intense in the interrogations, even though he still has a few beatdowns or off-color comments. And it's great too seeing. I mean, even the psychiatrist episode where he shoots at a bunch of guys and he can't remember how many shots he let off. It was interesting too how it was like he fills that thing, but he doesn't get any repercussions. But then he's just still told, hey, just do your job. But again, just let the other guys go in first. Just.
And,
I mean, for God's sakes, we have so many times where they're having to deal with other bullies in other police districts. That you can't say that everything is all glamorized either. You know, it's like, I love how they bring a bunch of realism. It's like they go to another district and the guys are instantly like, "Oh, you're anti-police, anti-union. We will cancel you." Basically, that's basically what they're doing. You know, and it's like, well, the one guy played by the guy who was he's the real life brother of Mayhem in those commercials. He was on Oz. I dug his bully, how he's constantly going to Sipowicz's car and like, putting a hole in his tire, and it takes a while. You're like, who
he poisons his fish.
What's that?
He poisons his fish.
Oh, that's right. He poisoned his fish.
Yeah.
He fucking picks his kid. He has some guy pick his kid up for 10 minutes and like drive him around and shit. Like, he's
just the ultimate intimidation. And I like that because we've all had people who we've encountered in a job where we're like, this guy is practically a sociopath, or lacking in empathy. Just that much cynicism on the job. I've worked at temp agencies and I've had people who just acted like, again, we were all prima donnas, and it's like, so basically I can report anything that's just not working and you won't even spend any time on it. You'll just pressure us to leave. Got it. That's just how this fucking place works. And I think that's just it. This show just reminds you about the disappointment you will anticipate. And there's several times, and I mean, Madavoy, I think you go around being kind of carefree. You can kind of suspend belief that he would get along with someone like Martinez or Simone. You're like, okay, they got nothing in common. I doubt this would work in real life, but hey, they're professionals. That's just how they are. They know they're all wired and odds, so they just get along. But I love how when you get post Baldwin Jones, and what a great addition, and no one talks about him enough. And it's like, I loved how he was having to also, again, deal with hood areas and do the whole, oh, you will not speak to me like that just because I'm in uniform. And I love how he also, I think, somewhere along the way, Madavoy says just like some fucked up thing about like, I punched that dog square in the jaw. I'm like, oh, okay, he's probably a alt-right asshole before there was a thing. He says a few off-color comments in like later seasons. You're like, yeah, I don't think anyone gets along with him. And his jokes that he does during his toast is like, oh man, those are cringeworthy. But that would probably happen in real life because that's just how he is.
Well, yeah, him and Sipowicz. Because I can't remember. There's so many episodes. I can't remember.
They go back. Ones. They like imply that they're like childhood pals or something.
Well, they have, I think, multiple run-ins where they say that they are both basically Republicans, and they also, it wasn't exactly a political race, but when they were talking about who would be the delegate for the union, they outwardly admitted that they were going to vote for a guy they think is an idiot rather than vote for Martinez. When it what's his name, Kyle? I can't remember his name.
Vince Catelli.
When Vince Catelli's running again, they're like, look, he's a moron, but he's got my vote. And I'm like, you're going to vote for a guy you outwardly don't respect. You've said it out loud that you don't respect him or like what he does, but you're going to vote for him because it won't be a change.
And that's realistic. Because, I mean, even though he's hanging out with Irwin, the openly gay, secretary, and they're cutting his hair, it's like, again, we all have bigotries, So again, sorry, Sipowicz, you are a Kyle, but there's plenty of other Karens on the show, but it's just gonna happen. Is like and again, it seems like it's impossible to tell people I'm not supporting them, but they're not 100%. It's just, it is what it is. You can have a drink with them, but you might see them in court because they're dealing with a crappy breakup or having to take down a mob boss who have a busted case against.
Yeah, it also speaks to how good those actors are. Because, I mean, Dennis Franz and Greg Medavoy, I can't remember your name, I apologize, but
we
both
hated
of them
him so much on Hill Street Blues and in Die Hard 2 as the annoying like head of security, and you're like, yeah, he's got this down to a T.
Like, they're so good at being those guys that you don't even second guess that they are those guys while watching the show. So it speaks to how good they are as actors, that they get together and they work on the scene and then do the scene where it's like, wow, they are those guys. They embody them perfectly. Even when they get annoyed with each other throughout the season, when Yeah, like Sipowicz gets a little too into the thing, and he's very short with everybody, and Medavoy is just complaining about him. It's like, yeah, these guys are exactly the characters they need for the show. It's just kind of
I can't see anyone else in the roles, you know? You can see plenty of other shows where you're like, that would have been inspired casting, or that could have gone one way or the other. It would have been good, but it, you know, depending on the writing or the takes, it might not have worked out or gotten viewers' attention. You just don't know. And have you ever seen Nicholas Totoro and John Leguizamo in the same room?
It's a good point. I have not.
Again, they don't look at all the same, but they have the exact same persona. And it's funny how you bring up Martinez, because he played a cop on a recent arc of Law and Order SVU where he like kidnaps one of the other detectives, and basically they have to find a way to just let him off the hook. And it's like, hey, I get it. You ransomed me so you could save your daughter who, you know, got kidnapped by a businessman with too many resources. We'll let you a pass. You're already not a working cop anymore, so why would I want to punish you any further? But it is interesting how everything else I've seen him in, he's basically just been a crook. And I think this and even that Hellraiser movie was in got him just some better offers. Like, hey, you can play some authority figures as opposed to fat, you know, Tony, the uncle of the block in New York, you know.
Yeah. Kyle, what were we going to
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say with the whole Medavoy Sipowicz thing, you kind of see that play out through like at the end. I feel like, because when it ends in season 12, like Medavoy leaves, but Sipowicz stays, and I think it shows like that Medavoy only treated this place as like a job, whereas like Sipowicz, like he was always a detective.
Mm-hmm.
Like Medavoy, like this was just a place to make money. Whatever, be with Donna, like whatever.
Right. And I think all these guys, I mean, most of them came kind of from a sitcom world. Like, what's her name, who played Baldwin's Valerie, you know, Garcelle Beauvais. And it's like, I think she got some better roles. And yeah, you mentioned Zach Morris, portrayer Mark Gosselaar. I think Andy does view Clark Jr. as kind of a son, since his, you know, drunk, fired, you know, senior, you know, is also kind of a disgraced cop. It's just interesting how they go into kind of conspiracy mode and find out other toxic mayhem while getting his life back on track. Because much like Danny Sorensen, you know, when he first joins, he doesn't know really what he wants to be a cop other than just pure pressure. And, you know, it's the cool kids thing to do. And it's like, he basically makes him take shit seriously. And, like you say, it's interesting too how, you know, at that point, he is basically the old retired uncle who, you know, again, not perfect, but you might invite to some party now that he's finally, you know, not pissing everyone off any public occasion he goes to, you know.
Yeah.
And he's not drunk all the time, because that's the other big runner through the whole series was alcoholism / I guess addiction of any kind. Because obviously we were so young when we were first watching it. I didn't realize just how
it mirrored the actor's life. Even Diane Russell, portrayer Kim Delaney, I had no idea she was a drunk for the longest time, and they worked that in.
Yeah, it's interesting to see a show where they take it seriously, but they also show you how bad it is. Like, we're going right now through the episodes where they talk about Dornan, who was the black sergeant who gets demoted and then starts drinking after like 15 years of sobriety. And that's like, a good
point. Yeah.
He's on like a rocket train to being basically homeless. Yeah. Like, it's so bad. And it's just Sipowicz and Fancy getting together, trying to help this dude. And it's so weird that a show could take that so seriously, as well as all this other stuff, and then also get other things completely wrong that we don't have to talk about now, but we could.
Yeah, I mean, I think they do a good job just bringing in. They struggled a bit on the attorneys because, you know, Sylvia, you know, was just such a highlight, and then the actress didn't want to do the role anymore, and then, you know, so lo and behold, you know, she's married to Sipowicz and she gets shot in a courtroom, and you're like, I'm kind of with you guys. Spoiler for an almost 30-year-old show, but yeah, it's like the way they wrote that was kind of questionable. Is like, yeah, they kind of rush it a bit. And when I saw it on Hulu, like one thing that does not age well on these older shows is the slow motion. It's just for no reason, however they remaster it, every time it will rush, and you're like, it's not meant to be goofy, but it's kind of going to Mystery Science Theater feel.
Oh yeah.
So let's think about this, right? So they killed beloved second wife. Straight murdered her in a courtroom.
Killing his kid in the line of duty wasn't good enough. So I was like, yep,
yeah,
Sylvia's getting
killed his second wife. His third wife disappears like towards the end of season 11 and is not in season 12 at all.
Yes, and Connie is one of the cops who marries him, and then the actress didn't want to do it, so they're like, "Well, it's okay." Her storyline.
And so they just say like, "We're gonna send you home, and you can just talk to him through the phone." Like that's how we're gonna we could have done that for Sylvia.
Good point.
And brought her in like once in a while to just like come to like a cop racket or something.
Well, she was on the Isles as the mom.
That's true.
In the defense,
I was just watching. She's a judge in Boston legal. So.
Oh, that's right. That was hysterical.
Yeah.
In the defense of NYPD.
In the defense rescue.
I think what happened is because I think they did the same thing with Jimmy Smits. They were so burned by what Caruso did. Because, like, he got a pretty decent send-off for basically saying, I want the hell out of here.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, well, he can come back anytime, and he never did. So I think they were kind of... Caruso.
He couldn't come back. He was a disgraced cop.
Did Caruso come back to NYPD Blue? I don't remember
ever
saying it.
Nope. But and plus they wrote out Janice as a result, Amy Burnham's character, because it's like, okay, and now we got to write out his ex-wife, Laura Sherry Stringfield. But that's okay. She's got ER. So it's like, it's like that whole plot line had to die away. And I think they did pretty good compared to, like you say, the other ones where you're just like the really, this actually brings me to my only grip. I absolutely dug Lieutenant Rodriguez, played by Isaiah Morales. It's like, you've never seen a lieutenant like that before. And he was able, I think, to hold his own. You weren't comparing him to Fancy, who, again, that's a big shoe to fill, is like James McDonald's star-making role. And here, Isai, he'd already done, La Bamba, and he's going to be on some other big shows later on, like Jericho. And is like, with this role, I think he did so well. He's dealing with a drug-addicted, slutty ex-wife, and then having to, again, maintain to Civil West is like, hey, I respect you, cop to another cop, but again, stop fucking around. Stop just not talking to me like I'm not in the room, and you guys stop sleeping with each other, and it was I really did not like how he exited stage right. And like when they come back from the break, like in one season premiere, somehow within a few days he's grown like he's become clean shaven all of a sudden. You're like, whoa, what happened? Going for Danny's killer. And it's the brief thing, but then it's like he exits stage right after a romance with Ortiz, Jacqueline Obrador's character, and you're just like, and then it's like they didn't know what to do with her except, okay, she's just gonna basically fulfill the role that Russell and Kirkendall had, where it's like, I arrest people. I'm basically part of the female vice squad. And it's like, well, give her something to do. Otherwise, she's just a talking voice in the room.
Well, the best part about her character is at the beginning of season 12, she berates, I don't know the actress's name, but she's Murphy. She's only in it for a year. Blonde, tall blonde girl.
Yeah, Bonnie Somerville.
Bonnie Somerville.
She berates the crap out of her for being too flirtatious at work, and it's like, yo, you just hooked up with your boss like 6 months ago.
Also, doesn't she hook up with Zack Attack too?
Yeah, you hooked up with Zack Attack too.
I really dug that, because that could have been very just dumb, like a very lame Rocky wannabe, Karate Kid thing, and it's like, basically it's like everyone to them is just the wrestling world is kind of an oyster, and so that's what they do afterwards is like cops fight other cops in the downstairs basement. But yeah, it's like after that is like then I guess they decided, hey, you know, let's just have Clark Jr. kind of be a dick one day and then realize, okay, I'm just too personal to everything. I need to just take a break. And Ortiz, she's got to go her own route.
Yeah, I think the show, to go back to my original point, I think what I was trying to make, I think they were like, well, yeah. I think they just wanted to say like, look, if you want to leave the show, you're done. So when people were leaving, yeah, like, so when people were leaving, like Jimmy Smits, his exit is so harsh. Like,
even
it's not
Bochco
like
wrote that exit, says like, yeah, he's going to help him out because Smits never let him down. You know, you go from LA Law and then to this. It's like, and now you're going to whatever TV movies, and then now Star Wars and a bunch of other recurring TV gigs. It's like yeah, the way they ended him was so like final that I feel like they just said, look, to even spare the embarrassment, because we bring back characters all the time. Martens is always coming in from the Rat Squad from IAB. Yeah, Russell takes off after a while, and then they bring her back to deal with like she's like head of the sex crimes unit. She's basically Detective Benson, you know, Mariska Hargitay on Law and Order. And isn't that wild? Wikipedia points out this might be because of that meta reference. Is like there's that one blonde guy who keeps messing with all the lieutenants and taking over for like part of division, and he's from the 27th district, which is the same department on the original Law and Order. I'm like, oh, that's meta. That's cute.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So it made me wonder, because it's like there's plenty of other connections to where you could connect it to the same elsewhere homicide universe, but it's like I never would have thought that would be the one line of dialogue that was a giveaway. Oh yeah, man.
I'm trying to remember. I think there's another show that connects to NYPD Blue that's shocking that I can't put together, but I do know
Cop Rock.
Yeah, Cop Rock.
That
of course.
Awful musical, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like the LA Law, and well, also there's that one guy who's they nicknamed Buck Naked. He's apparently was on Hill Street Blues, and so that's the connection too.
Oh yeah,
and I didn't remember that character, but I was like, that's the connection of all things. So I guess that show was in New York as well.
Mm-hmm. And the only one I can remember was on, I guess it was The Muppets or Sesame Street. They did NYPD Green, where they pretended that Kermit was a detective on the streets of New York.
Oh, that's creepy.
And they were, and they did a really weird job of censoring all the bad words. I remember that was the joke. Was we're going to do NYPD Blue, but we can't say any of the bad words. So there's all these weird sound effects instead of words.
Family Guy had one joke where it's like they're just basically the guy's interrogating someone in an interrogation room and then just drops his pants and was like, that's funny.
Well, there's also, I mean, to talk about another great show love of mine, probably one of the best.
The Drew Carey Show.
One of the best South Park
Martinez
episodes.
Appears in one episode.
Probably one of the best South Park episodes, it hits the fan, was about NYPD Blue saying shit. I'm pretty sure. And
I'm pretty sure too. I mean, just anything at that time. They were always sneaking in a few things, and it's so wild how they'd let ER or Third Watch get away with it. But the show, it's just funny how you just wonder if it's a popularity contest or if it's just people at the wrong time just, I hate something, I don't know what it means or even is incorporated, but I must complain. I must write in the FCC.
Oh, I 100% think it's that, because like when people are rewatching it now, they're not complaining about the language or the like few
they're just talking about the themes. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was 100%. It was 100% the time, and people just like not seeing something like that and just being taken aback. But now I would consider it light compared to some things that you do see.
Oh,
like
totally.
compared to Deadwood, this is like a cartoon. This is like a Saturday morning cartoon.
Although in all fairness, even Deadwood, I mean, when it's brutal, you just know why it's going brutal versus like Game of Thrones, which just is basically hard soft porn, half the time. And,
yeah. Oh, 100%.
And like
100%.
to say is like Bochco he just saw what was being shown on the movie channels. He's like, that's the kind of show I'm going to make. And anyone's got a problem with it, you can show me the door, because I'm not going to stop doing what I want to do. And like you say, it's just hard to, I don't know. It's just, sometimes you just wonder if it's just a dumb person calling in versus just someone just doesn't like something and they just must complain. And
it's also,
that's true.
It's also clear that they're not actually watching it, because there's so many episodes of NYPD Blue where they'll describe a crime. Like, they described what happened to the victim, and you're like, that in and of itself was way more disturbing.
Even Kirk especially, she's always dealing with a rape. And like, there's that one episode, remember, where Baldwin takes the one rapist into the room and just has him witness the awful shit he's done. And it's like, that's as R-rated as it gets for me. Is this like, he's forcing the guy to watch the crime he committed on videotape, and just like saying, hey, you're not going to do that shit again, man.
Or even when I think of like the Webster killer, or some of the like really disturbing.
The one guy who was sawing people up in the apartment building. We thought the Wally guy was behind it. It's like, no, he just saw who was doing it. He's just a voyeur creep.
Or the what's the other one? There was one where a head, because I remember when I saw it in the Hulu edit, I was like, they didn't show that on TV, right? That's impossible. Where they found the they found the DOA in their chair, and the person had cut off their head and put it in their lap.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's no way they showed it like that. That's way too explicit. And they're like, nope, that's how it was. And I'm like, that's way more worse than seeing some side boob.
I think they did get to where it's just like, it's kind of like with X-Files. That when it started, everyone was like, oh, it's kind of gritty. Don't show your kids that. It's nightmare fuel. And yet, same thing with even Star Trek. I mean, there's so much even mature material that they don't even show, but it was just kind of one of those, just like, everyone thought it was just like Star Wars. It's like, okay, it'll go over the kid's head. Don't worry about it, And
yeah, they won't get it.
It is funny how we're still kind of seeing that. I mean, with people rewriting what can be displayed in certain schools, is like, just so, everyone can think the world's fine. Every war we fought is good. And, keep politicians in power through, ignorance. It's just very interesting seeing how is like, everyone was kind of ahead of that. Is like, we were predicting the whole, just don't show anyone anything, and they won't ask questions and you won't have to deal with it. And it's just like, that's even worse, because then they'll ask it at an inappropriate time years later down the road.
Yeah.
Or they don't ask, and when they're faced with something that involves like,
they have a midlife crisis and they're like, I don't know what to do.
Or they like do something that causes harm to someone else, whether that's like mental or physical. Like, so no, 100%.
Well, and you guys have already done, you constantly are even talking about how the characters in and of themselves, and once again, a factor of the good writing, how they are just afraid to even just confront certain truths about themselves. And so they'll often, they do just so good at, you can pretty much memorize the set then and there. It's like someone's doing something unusual in the restroom, or someone is having to, again, just walk down and right by the jail cell or the interrogation room and just think this out, or someone hogged the coffee maker. But they do a good job of just keeping you in suspense. It's like, okay, they're in a mood, but why are they in this mood? So, and by the end of the episode, it'll be something so simple as like, hey, just the way you looked at me, you intimidated me, or some shit. And it's like, yeah, I can see that happening, because that happens in any workplace.
Yeah.
Sipowicz is a fantastic example of, well, two things, but he's a fantastic example of someone that cannot handle stress in the workplace.
No, you think he's going to have a heart attack all the time, and when he does, it's like, man.
He also, it's what happens when you don't get ahead of someone who can't handle stress in the workplace. Because he'll have whole episodes where he just takes over the entire investigation, where he's like, I'm in charge now, and everyone's like, okay, but you're not. Like, you're not in charge. You're just more upset than the rest of us, but it doesn't mean you're actually in charge of anything we do, but he'll just still bark out orders and be short with everybody. And it's because he thinks his like wife's in danger. And it's like, she's fine. By the way, she's fine. The kid's fine. Everything's fine. You're just being a dick.
You have to ask yourself, someone who doesn't handle stress well, should they be a detective?
Kind of. It's kind of a good question.
And I pretty much got it in my mind that he just hit it pretty well, and then eventually he just started caving into it to where he's like, yeah, no, it's rearing its ugly head at the worst possible times. And I like how they do that even later on with like the other the final lieutenant, Bell, in the final season, just played to excellence by Curry Graham. I already seen him on a bunch of other stuff, like that one questionable attorney on Longmire. And he, you know, I mainly knew him from this. I just seen clips of it when it was re-airing on TNT. And there was even a special, I think, that used to be on YouTube talking about the whole wrap up. And it's like, we come a long way. We've evolved so naturally. And I love how he eventually is just like, hey guys, anything you were doing the last few years, you're not doing this year. Get over it. And after that point, they kind of give up on the attorneys who were going to be the attorneys. But I loved how all of them, like Sylvia and the other guys, would put up with whether or not they might have to retry a certain case because the evidence was obtained questionably. But yeah, I love how later on it's like everything is called into question. It's like that makes it a better obstacle course anyway. And again, like you say, a lot of people just want to look at it at face value as opposed to the underlying tones. Is like, well, that's probably going to happen because guess what? If you want to show, if you had everything be lolly dolly, you know, then you're going to find it even more unrealistic. You're just like, yeah, this is New York, rough, tough. Yeah, they're not going to play by the rules. They're not going to have a perfect bread and butter case. It's going to be messy.
You talk about like unrealistic. Kyle and I, we going through the show right now in season 6. Like the thing that's completely ridiculous now is everybody has sex with each other. Like that's just obviously that's just a product of it being a television show. But thinking about how many times the lieutenant has to turn a blind eye to the fact that everybody in his station house is in a relationship in some way, and it's causing problems constantly. Like the fact that the episode that it came to a head in a great way was Kirkendall and Leo, the assistant district attorney, start having like childish spats in the middle of a discussion about a case. And Fancy, like at the end of it,
she's getting wired up.
And then at the end of it, Fancy has a moment where he's like, I might have to reconsider them being on this case. And I was like, you should have considered that days ago. Like it should never gotten here.
I kind of got that because like Tamara Tooney, you know, shout out to future Dr. Warner on SVU. It's interesting. Is like, I think he's away so much from home and everything. And I don't know. I think he's already, I kind of got the sense that he was already dealing with like racial pressure, people not used to seeing a lieutenant in charge.
For sure.
Even just the downtown. I love how they perfectly illustrate, because like how many times have we had to, you know, go to court, you know, challenge a ticket or whatever and all that. And they perfectly, I think, I saw actor Chris Noth talk shit about how he's like, I can't stand how they film this in LA. He's like, I think they do a pretty good job making it look like a New York, you know, Bronx type street. And just the whole, I got to go to downtown, you know, I got to deal with those guys. And I mean, even the desk sergeants, I love how they illustrate is like, those guys can be toxic one day versus pleasant 1 minute, or you didn't have a bad experience because they weren't on shift that day. And I mean, I get that now with the post office, depending on who's on duty determines your customer service. And it's like, ugh, it's bad.
Yeah. And you have all these dudes, like, that's another thing about NYPD Blue that's so cool, is how it kind of makes a world of policing in New York and then makes all these connections. Like you have Martens and IAB, you have the chief of D's, which changes over time. You have other sergeants and you have other detectives and other patrolmen or uniform officers, and you'll see them from time to time. And those guys will have histories. Like we talked about Dornan, who gets demoted and then starts to drink again. There's I want to say like Santos, but I know that's not his name. there's a guy who was helping out Jimmy Smits' character Simone a lot.
I think I know. Yeah.
Yeah, and these guys are like, well, those are the guys I know in those districts, and I trust them. But then there's also guys in other districts that once they hear their name, they're like, well, we're not going to get anywhere. We're just like, I know that guy. He's not going to do shit for us. Or anytime they have to deal with a precinct like in another part of the country where they're like, oh, we have to call Philadelphia. Like, they're not going to do shit for us. Like, it's always kind of dismissive.
Even like that key, it's either season 3 or 4 where they go out of town to like a country-ish area of New York. I really dug that episode because it just showed they're just intimidated by just going out of their comfort zone. It's like, that's just it. These guys were from very strict families and everything. So you get that whole idea that eventually shit hits the fan. And, you know, again, it just rears its ugly head. Everyone introduces each other in a very awkward, unpleasant way, and then has to say, "Hey, do you just want to get a drink? Because I got nothing else to offer, and I don't mean to be a prick, but I'm very prickly today."
And also, I have no license to give him a diagnosis, but there's parts of me that really thinks that Sipowicz is like on the spectrum slightly. Because he has moments in social situations where it's like, dude, it's really hard for you to see the social cues and for you to interact with these people. And that's okay. But you not understanding that leads to a lot of problems with like complete strangers, with victims.
That's
sometimes.
Even more realistic too. I mean, how many times did you correct your siblings or a friend growing up and they were just too thick-headed or shallow to understand what you're talking about, and you just had to say, "Okay, well, I don't have time to deal with this right now, so I'm just going to tell you, stop saying that shit." You know, it is interesting how you got to take a shortcut sometime, but it sucks because like they still don't learn, and it's like, well, and I think that speaks to, I mean, even today's world where people are like, "Oh, it's too PC," yada yada, when they talk about they get into an internet culture war. I'm like, I don't think you guys know why this is a problem. You just want to make fun of the fact that you're getting canceled by saying this. And it's just like, there's just so many contrarian people, and the show deals pretty well with the essence of it. It's like, how many times did you get told, "Hey, just stop what you're doing right now," you know, or there's going to be consequences, you know, and even some of these actors, I'm fine with the fact that they play similar stuff years later on. Like, I loved how Michael B. Silver, who played ADA, you know, Attorney Cohen, you know, is like, I every other thing I've seen him in, I basically have seen him, you know, just like Criminal Minds or one of those Boston Legal type shows, just play a lawyer. But I mean, I think they get even more wiggle room if they've been doing almost, you know, half a decade's worth of shows like this. They get more freedom to do all these other just intimidating or hard to describe kind of roles. And it just helped that I mean, like you were summing up earlier, I mean, you got to face the music, you got to face your truths, and sometimes if you don't want to, then, you know, it just fades out in unpleasant ways. You know, it's just where people just don't want to talk to you, or you say, like, I love how when they even describe some of these guys are, I mean, they do a good job also of just illustrating how pregnant cops are discriminated against. Just attorneys are kind of revered even more and hated by cops more than internal affairs, you know?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
And
well, sorry, go ahead. Well, yeah, it's because, like you mentioned, the politics of it all, but it's also interesting how, I'm trying to organize this thought correctly. It's very interesting how these guys are always at odds with each other, but they still have the same goal, and it creates such a weird, like, and I'll only seem to refer to the stuff we're watching now because Kyle went ahead and watched the rest of the series, and I'm still in season 6 making the notes for the episodes. So, like,
it's all good.
Right now, like, when towards the end of season 6, they're doing one case, really, which is about a guy who was giving women intentionally too harsh of drugs to watch them die on camera. And all the friction is not whether this guy did this. Everybody knows he did this. Everybody knows that that's what happened. The problem is his attorney is James Sinclair, who walks in and dresses down everybody and just
based on
controls
his
the
personal
room.
history with them. And I do love how they do courtroom scenes on this because,
Oh yeah.
Bochco's LA Law would go for the absurd. The practice in Law and Order will take creative license. 24 will often end with, well, you're both wrong, or the person we were just arguing about, the terrorist on trial, is dead, so we got to start all over. And I just love how when they do courtroom stuff like this, basically, he's pressuring them, but not in a way where, like, they just do it in a way better way. You're like, yeah, I can totally see they're basically pulling an O.J. Simpson lawyer take on this. Is like, and I like it even more because it just feels a little more plausible. It's like this guy's waiting for a news camera to come into the room so he can, get a pay raise.
Yeah, and to shout out another book that I read because of NYPD Blue. They did some
good books on this show. They really are.
What Would Sipowicz Do has an article about how NYPD Blue explained legal language better than most lawyers can, because in every courtroom scene, you notice that every defense lawyer is trying to reword the question in the mind so the juror immediately has doubt. It was never like every question is asked not to prove, oh, the person didn't do it. Every question is asked to make the juror questions like, well, is that 100% accurate? So like James Sinclair, like I didn't realize it until I read that article. The way he asks questions is so very specific to get the cop or the witness to seem non-credible for just a moment, because that's all he needs. And then he could talk around them until they look foolish. And it's pretty insane. It's pretty insane because then you have Cohen, who you mentioned that actor, and it's proof that NYPD Blue casts almost perfectly, like every time.
Judy Laurie Johnson, my friends, and I light up whenever I would see her name at the end of, like, say, CSI, Star Trek, or even Prison Break episode. Like, they're in good hands. You just know they're going to pick all these actors who've been around forever, who've done theater, soap operas, and they're ready to, make their star-making role for a 5-part character arc. And I mean, it's funny you bring that up because it's like, there are so many like recurring characters. It's like this was doing basically 5 character arcs before that was a thing. Now, a typical NCIS episode will often do that, and it's awesome. You're like, now I have a reason to tune in because I know it's all connected. It's not, and the Super Friends have saved the day. It's not. Go home for the day. It's like even when you see them going home for the day, you're just like, you can just tell. You just feel the exhaustion on their head, and again, just the music and editing is good. I still see people complain about shaky cam and everything. Is like, I can do it in basically anything unless it's certain Christopher Nolan movies where I get a headache. But it's like now there's so many other shows that would not exist without that technique. Like The Shield would have a lot of people even just peeking in on each other, just like having suspicions about their coworkers, and same kind of deal. People would look at it at face value and say, oh, it's another NYPD homicide or SVU clone. It's like, no, not even close. Similar. And same thing that Bosch is kind of doing. I saw it seems like it's got a pretty high rating, but there were occasionally some critics who said, oh, it's good, but it's just another cop show. I'm like, you're not even paying attention to it. I mean, it's got the same, similar, but it's not the same.
Yeah, that always happens with, because folks, I mean, friends and coworkers and acquaintances, like I'll tell them like, well, I have a podcast about NYPD Blue, and most of them have no idea what it is. So then I explain it, and then they're like, oh, so it's like Law and Order. And I'm like, it's not like Law and Order. It's kind of like Law and Order, but it's not.
Not even remotely. Same thing with that. Yeah. I mean, I even see shows like Ray Donovan and Power. I mean, you want to talk careers. What's her name? Created Ray Donovan, wrote won an Emmy for writing some key Sipowicz episodes in like season 2 or 3. Her name will come to me in a second, but yeah, same deal. I'm seeing people say, oh, it's trying to be too much like Breaking Bad or Sopranos. I'm like, it might exist because of that, but I mean, Ann Biderman's her name, and yeah, she does great on Ray Donovan. Same kind of deal. Like, I don't think Milch would have done Deadwood, I don't think she would have done Ray Donovan had they not had great experience working on this show. And like you say, yeah, it's like, I mean, people always act like certain shows were the first ones to do this or that. And it's like, why does no one even talk about Oz? It's like that show in of itself talked about how we're kind of like Tales from the Crypt, but we're not. We're going to show a bunch of unrelated people who have similar stories. They're all in this experimental society, And, it seems like everyone likes to just, again, get on the chopping block and they were starting internet wars before they were internet wars. It's just distractingly bad because you're just like, please stop, enjoy it. It can all be enjoyed. Yeah, I see. Yeah. I mean, I did a Sam Raimi episode on here, and even Larry Cohen, and I had people who kind of hated their work, and who legit loved their work. But it fortunately wasn't a shit show because I had some of them were like, oh, I don't really like superhero movies, but I like horror movies, or I like superhero movies, but I don't like horror movies. It's like you can like it all, and I guarantee you, chances are, if you don't like something, you've just seen the worst that it had to offer. You haven't seen the good stuff. And I was the same way. Like, I used to think sci-fi movies were kind of boring, and it's like, well, there's some good slow burn stuff that stays with you that is philosophical. And the same thing with horror. It was like, okay, not all of it is torture porn. Some of it is very witty and grim and gothic-y. So it's like the same thing with action. It's like not all of it is Fast and Furious type car chases. Some of it is very legit, well done spy, assassin, revenge movies. And
you're right. They all can't be that good. With family and beer, and the throwing away of. And in Fast 9, we forgot how magnets work. No, but what's happening, and it's kind of great, is with the internet and things getting so fracted. Like I just saw the Batman. I just saw the Batman yesterday. That is as much a mystery detective story as it is a superhero movie. And you think about the certain superhero movies are now they're shifting into, well, this is more of a comedy. Well, this is more of a horror. This is more of a this. And I think the more we get to where you're adding genres or splitting genres, like Shaun of the Dead, an amazing idea and a super funny movie, but also very good zombie movie. It's just letting, I guess, people catch up with the fact, Kyle will agree. Our father has this thing where the second I say the movie is an animated movie, he's not watching it because cartoons are for children. And it's like, dude, I understand what
Pixar and DreamWorks. Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, and so same thing here. I see people just say, "Oh, it's a cop show." What does that mean? Good or bad? It's going to let them get off and solve the crime. I'm like, have you seen Chicago PD lately? Virtually everyone has committed a murder or is about to be prosecuted or go too far. So it's like, yeah, I think everyone likes to create barriers before they even allow it. I see it even with people who are fans of certain actors are like, I haven't liked anything they did afterwards. I'm like, but you haven't seen anything they did later on. So how can you say that? And yeah, I think that's just it. I think people like to, again, they just like to be Kyles and Karens. They like to just talk shit
without seeing it.
I talked a bit about internal affairs. I'll just talk briefly about Brooklyn South. So this was on, around shortly after season 5 and 6 that CBS wanted some of that Botchko drama. And so he obligated, long story short, typical, CBS pulled a Fox or an NBC for that matter, and just scheduled it in between Monday Night Football, and Les Moonves wasn't digging it. And it's got a mature audience rating just because someone gets shot in the head in the opening episode, as if the bare butts and people getting called, homophobic slurs wasn't bad enough. But I did have the full DVD of this, and it was dynamite. It was great. It was a really awesome show. And unfortunately, it leaves you wanting more at the end because it just sets it up just so well. And so many great actors on this. Richard T. Jones, who's on The Rookie now with Nathan Fillion, and was on the Terminator show, is on here as an officer frequenting prostitutes. Again, you mentioned before we started, Bryan Cranston has a brief recurring arc as a crooked internal affairs guy And yeah, the connection to NYPD is that, yeah, the Paul Ben Victor's snitch appears for a few episodes, and the main IAB guy, played by Scott Allen Campbell, shows up for about 2 episodes as well. It's a who's who of precinct TV. Practically is like John Tinney from Tombstone, and later on in The Closer is the main guy. The guy playing the desk sergeant has gone on to do plenty of other stuff like The Irishman. Titus Welliver, who was the doctor on NYPD Blue and is now Harry Bosch, is also on here as a moody cop who kind of goes along with the flow, and Adam Rodriguez, pre-CSI Miami and Criminal Minds. So it's like, yeah, it's just, this made so many stars. Even the head writer of Southland and Criminal Minds worked on this with a bunch of Bochco's other usual creative team and a bunch of his other police advisors. And it's just like, it's just so much goodness. And I was even fortunate enough to look at the special features. They're pretty good, including the blurb you get from Bochco, if you can get past the shoddy circa pre-YouTube transition noises. But I mean, it even had like some stuff for like police codes. I'm like, that's a great special feature, because it's like, I understand 10.4, like comprehend, understood, but I don't understand all these other ones that are very important to know.
Oh wow! So yeah, now I have to watch the show.
10:11, audible alarm is sounding. 10:22, larceny. 10:30, robbery in progress. You know, it's like 10:52, dispute. And it also has Dylan Walsh, you know, who was later on, he was like the IRA smuggler on Longmire, and there's a bunch of other shows. But yeah, I mean, it will leave you wanting more. And at the same time, you're satisfied just watching this, because like, it's just so different. Like Hill Street was kind of about, again, just the mechanisms of multiple parts of law society, you know, and showing patrol cops. And this was just, you know, NYPD was about showing the detectives. This shows patrol cops, but then it even goes a step further. Like, it's just showing the Brooklyn area and how basically, I mean, I was listening to some true crime podcasts around the same time on how, you know, women will be beat up and they can't get a proper restraining order against their husbands because they happen to be a drunk police officer off duty, or just they're ex-cons or something. And this plays on a lot of that, as well as just how people try to redeem themselves, and same kind of deal. Like, you know, the one guy who was Baldwin on NYPD is having to deal with by getting custody of his abused son. He's on this as well as this gunman. And even though the gunman is killed in the first episode of Brooklyn South, like they get even more experimental than Andy's nightmares of him imagining himself as his dad abusing him. You know, it's like they do that kind of surreal stuff too, where they're imagining the gunman in the, you know, with the bullet holes still intact, you know, intimidating, talking to them, you know, holding them hostage in a room. So this just was just so creative, and it's just one of those other things. It's just like Milch was just kind of getting bored of working with Bochco, and Bochco was tired of him, you know, kind of working on his ADD nature. So, I mean, it's just a shame that they all were having to kind of cave into network pressure and go their own route. And Bochco was having to find out, you know, what can I do that's new, that's not a repeat of my formulas. And I think this was just too good for its own good. You know, it's just this is when all the networks were changing their standards, cable TV was getting edgier, and the Emmys were putting pressure on, you know, what they consider worthy of being awarded. So I think this is it. Again, it's just, all this stuff is just too good, but we see through it because we encounter elements of it every day. So that's why it appeals to us the most, as opposed to, like you say, other shows, which again, you know, every show goes downhill after a while. We can name a season of a show we didn't like after a while. And this is just awesome sauce, like you guys said, still illustrating. And I mean,
I will submit that maybe there is a show that hasn't done that yet, and its name is South Park, but that would just be me. I think South Park hasn't gone down yet, but I'm afraid.
I mean, they disowned trigger warning. I mean, they did kind of disown the Coon episode, but I thought that was at least in the right direction, despite not always being as funny as they thought it was. But I mean, that's just it. I mean, I did see some recent South Park, and it just kind of depressed me. But I'm sure I might be laughing at it years from now when I'm not too close to the music, when we're hopefully in a better society. So I think that's just it too. I mean, I think everyone acts like you got to enjoy it when it's on, and if you didn't watch it then, it's irrelevant now. Well, it's like that's not how this works.
Yeah, I mean, quick story about South Park. Like the season when Donald Trump was elected, I didn't watch it. And the reason I didn't watch it is because at the time they were doing full season arcs, which is like the first time or like second time they've ever done that. And I knew because they would do an episode about who became president without knowing for sure, and they would base it on Vegas odds. And I knew that Trump did not have Vegas odds, so they made an episode where he did not win and Hillary did. So I was like, I don't know what they could have done to fix it. And also, I'm very afraid of what they're going to just come out and say on television when this happens. It'll make it all too real. It took me like a year to finally watch that entire season to see what they said.
It was just, I'm the same way. I mean, I was the same way when Randy eats a bad and gets like COVID or something. It's like, okay, but that's just it. Like, all these shows are kind of anti-TV. Like, we were even talking about how Community was just able to kind of roll through the fold, pre-streaming, and yet just had this giant cult fan base that hadn't been seen kind of in a while. And and nowadays it's kind of just second nature. People take it for granted. Hey, if I want to see what the viewer thinks, I can go onto Twitter,
Yeah.
But
yeah, absolutely.
I'm even more worried about what the future is going to hold now, because there's still some people who just seem to think, Rotten Tomatoes is the end all. It's got a low user score but a high critic score. It's like, at the end of the day, you got to just speak for yourself. Just
absolutely.
Use the references. And I don't know.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what movie I recommended. It was like, I think it was like Point Break. It was some movie from like the 90s or early 2000s, and they were like, well,
one of those movies. Yeah.
And they were like, well, the Rotten Tomato score isn't that great. I was like, yeah, it's probably never going to be great. Just watch the movie. It's good. I'm telling you. There's a time I feel like any movie that came out before Rotten Tomatoes was a thing, don't go to the Rotten Tomatoes score. Just watch it and see how you feel.
Right. Sometimes
the only
you
people
can't even get it. It's just
like,
to be available.
Like the only people that go to Rotten Tomatoes, like, I need to review this film, are either people that really love it, so they feel like they have to, or people that really hate it, so they feel like they have to. So it's not really a good way to measure anything. But
no, especially with the whole. I mean, I see other people shitting on this one. I go to Metacritic because I know, okay, they're going to at least give it maybe a 50 or 60%, because there's going to be movies like that where you're like, it's good, but it's not great. It's not excellent. It's flawed. It's imperfect, but it's entertaining. Or it's it's average. It's mediocre, but it's not atrocious or unwatchable, And unfortunately, Rotten Tomatoes likes to play, much like the show reveals the gray area of society and how everyone is different on a different day, and is same kind of deal there. Is like, people just seem to think it's one or the other. It's good and there's everything else. I'm like, not exactly. There's gonna be something which everyone likes but you don't care for, or you're not the audience for, so you don't like it. And I think Letterboxd is kind of a diamond in the rough, because as many people like to troll around or just give like brief sentence reviews while hammered or high, I think there's still some people who are able to reveal occult movies or lesser seen stuff and reveal that you can still have a casual get together. You don't have to have a, one person speaks for all vibe, let alone, we reviewed it and it's one and done. There's no need to revisit. It's like, no. There's going to be people who get caught up with stuff. So what better way to talk to someone who is also catching up on stuff like this, or has a similar voice or take on it? You know, and I see people. I don't even know how people even bother with YouTube, because you just know you're going to get trolled the fuck out of the comment section.
Yeah, YouTube. I mean, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. It's all pretty bad. It's
amazing how you even have to remind people, no, don't take that with a grain of salt. And they want to respond to the troll. I'm like, that's what the troll wants. Stop responding to the troll. I've never seen this, but it sucks. Doggy cock. I'm like, well, you already know that's a troll because they just said, I've never seen it. And I still got to respond. No, that's what they want. You're giving them a try.
They want attention. Yeah. Yep.
So I guess a few other just closing thoughts. I mean, like, how would you introduce this to certain people? I mean, obviously, like you say, it stinks that Hulu is the edited copy, but it's also kind of the best looking copy. You know?
I mean, I've accidentally introduced it to someone who has been on the show now, been on NYPD Blue Balls, because they randomly messaged me. And at that time we were kind of just acquaintances, and said, I'm listening to your show. And I was like, no, you're not. And then they showed pictures of their played episodes. And I was like, are you watching the show too? And he's like, yeah, the show is great. And I was like, good. That's like really the only reason I ever did the podcast. I want more people to watch the show. It is very fun hanging out with Kyle and talking about the show. And we had a podcast before that was just, let's talk about anything. And then it just turned into, let's talk about NYPD Blue all the time.
You guys did good on it, because I mean, you're just very natural conversation, as opposed to, we're, against the clock. We got to do this and that. And too many people like try to do too many things all at once. And as much as I love them, I say that from my heart. There are some podcasts that I love that will take forever to do the whole. And so what are you watching this week, Kyle? What are you doing this with your life, Kirk? I'm like, no one gives a fuck about that. Just get to the point. And I've had other people say, why don't you work in this or that? I'm like, I'm not a game show. I can't even, this isn't, we record these in advance. I can't do the weekly thing. I can't do the live thing, because I know someone's going to say something out of context, or it's just not going to sound good. So why bury myself alive doing that? It's just like, I want the episode to be solid. I want it to be a fun, pleasant chat. And I mean, I see other people too who feel like they just don't want to even record with each other if they feel they're going to be on opposing sides of the argument. I'm like, well, that's the whole point. That it's impossible to agree. And
the most entertaining version of our show is when Kyle and I completely disagree on something on the show.
I love how you have to do so many disclaimers. We edited this. We wanted to make it sync better. So sorry, you're gonna you're hearing me talk about this, and I'm telling you now what we talked about.
It's I think the best way, because that's the other thing. What people do, I don't know. I'm going to sound kind of like a get off my lawn guy about this.
Oh, dear Clint, no.
But like, there's this thing where people go, okay, well, what's the episode? Or they're like, what's the season? And my thought and my response is, start at episode 1. If you're not hooked by 5 episodes into season 1, I don't think you're really going to like the show. I would say, if you didn't really like those first episodes, start in season 2, episode 5, when Jimmy Smith shows up. If that doesn't grab you after 2 or 3 episodes, you're not going to like the show.
I think some people are revisiting it a bit. It is fun seeing even Star Trek actors like Denise Crosby here as a short-lived replacement lieutenant, Tasha Yar. But then, I mean, I found it even funnier how I knew Robert Lasardo, who I actually met at a convention years ago. I knew he was on the show, but I had no idea he was in, being prosecuted by future, CSI Miami co-star, Caruso. So it's just so wild. It's like the guy you're prosecuting for 2 episodes in an interrogation room who's a gangbanger. is also the guy who kills your wife in CSI. So, yeah, it's wild how I've even encountered other people who've had like some loose connection to it. Like I knew a guy who was an outspoken extra who actually pissed off Dennis Franz years ago. And Franz was like, get this guy out of here. He's talking to me at the hot dog stand. He doesn't know the essence of being an extra. And so I think this is it. I think everyone's known about it in some capacity. And like I say, it's just like people want to, fortunately, the good wins over time instead of the bad. I think people want an edgy show. They want to see what their parents were probably watching, and they can forgive just any outdatedness. So yeah, I'm really happy with what Paramount and Hulu are doing, in addition to, what's the newest thing you saw on Netflix or Apple. There's something for everybody now, as opposed to, let's watch a shitty horror movie on Shudder, or let's go to the bottom of the barrel bin of, what would have been a VHS rip on Amazon Prime. It's like, there's just now the market just is changing up a little better to where it's a little more agreeable as well. It's like, okay, here's a cool show that you can watch, and this is the best quality it's going to get. And it's not all perfect. You definitely, if you're doing Hulu, you want to go ad free, because I'm telling you, ads will drive you crazy. That it's not bad because the ads are bad. I mean, they most certainly are, but it's also just that they keep replaying it. So I think I went as far back as like 2018. Like I got to the end of the year. I just got a great new job, which I'm still working in. And it got to where it's like, okay, if I have to see Kim Kardashian tell Alex Rodriguez and J-Lo about DirecTV one more time, I'm going to punch someone. And so it got to that point where I was just like, nope, and no. And I'm watching Stargate, I'm watching this, I'm watching all these other great shows. Commercials are going to have to go for $3 more. It's worth it. And like to say, I mean, there are a lot of people who will do the whole, what were the top 5 episodes I should watch? What are the best of this or that? And it's just like, you can't sum this up in just 2 episodes. Just watch the whole damn thing. And it's the same thing too, where everyone I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes you have been encouraged to kind of rewatch a movie when you look at it on Wikipedia and saying, I might like it this go around, but then there are other times where, like you say, I'm like, what is the point of you asking that? Are you going to watch this or not? Otherwise, this is as much as you're getting. I leave it to you on whether you want to push the button or not. Don't get mad at me and say, oh, you wasted my time because you recommended this. Yes, because I liked it.
Yeah.
Well, sorry you didn't like it.
I feel sometimes people just want you to tell them what the whole show is about from start to finish. And then they can make the decision instead of finding
and they judge it all in the same merit.
Yeah.
Like I was in film school and I would see people that are like, if it doesn't look like a Christopher Nolan movie, I want nothing to do with it. I'm like, it's so unrealistic.
Yeah. Well, and because you asked how we pitched the show, but what I said, the most recent thing I said was NYPD Blue is a bingeable cop drama about detectives in New York, but mostly about the struggles and triumphs of a specific detective who is racist and alcoholic. It's a coming-of-age
tale, about imperfect people who may or may not correct their lives. Like Mattavoy doesn't correct himself, but he's kind of accepted. Like you say, Andy fixes himself, but to a point, not 100%. And everyone kind of views each other as a family, but not in a preachy Hallmark way, more in just like, hey, I respect you. And just, if you want to just see, again, just excellent actors before they were, a big thing, like Lourdes Benedicto before she was on ER in 24, just does great work as Gina Martinez's girlfriend. And so there's all these other eye-catching, just dynamite actors who complement the material that's already working. And I mean, I think it'll come in stages. I'm seeing other people that are watching shows like the Chicago shows and what have you. And so they want to see something just as gripping as that. And this is a blueprint for that. And I mean, out of all the Bochco shows, obviously LA Law is pretty outdated, but is interesting, especially if you want to see pre-Psych Corbin Burnson, still it. And Hill Street Blues, I think, is a little more it's tougher to watch nowadays just because it really does get into the ugly and benign personas that are just toxic. So I think this one is like the best compromise. If you just want to see just all the cast and crew at their best, just hop on in. There is something for everyone. And again, I mean, just like you, I've had pals who are like, they don't want to watch this. They just always hated David Caruso growing up, or they kind of like a Stallone kind of nature. They just associated his infamous film, Razzie nominations with the persona, but they haven't actually seen it. It's like, okay, well, that's as good as not seeing it all. Don't go on just what the audience says. Weigh in.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, if you hear something is bad, you still got to see it just before you pitch in. Well, I think I'm going to hate it anyway. I'm like, you can't think that way. There's always going to be an exception to the rule. I guarantee you, there's going to be a movie that's 50% on Rotten Tomatoes that you love. And
yeah, absolutely.
I hate how they also do the whole, after 5 reviews, it got this rating. I'm like, yeah, that's not even speaking for anyone, even remotely. That's speaking for basically 1%.
Yeah, and the reason I tell people, like, give NYPD Blue a couple episodes and see how you feel. NYPD Blue, and Kyle will attest, I mean, I did the same thing. If you start watching NYPD Blue and like you get hooked, it's very much like a binging experience where like 2 weeks later you're 2 seasons in and you don't even know how you got there. Like that's what happened.
It really
to my
does
friend.
flow very naturally. And Stargate's on Netflix now, and I'm seeing a lot of people same kind of deal. Like it just predicted streaming before it was a thing. Like it's like they knew they had to get your attention every episode, so the last thing they're going to do is bore the shit out of you or have a filler. Even the best shows, when they get to a filler, there's always often like a cool segment near the end where you're just like, okay, that there's still something for everyone there. Is like, I learned this plot twist that I remember later being a big factor in this, but I didn't realize this is how this and that started. And I mean, like you say, I mean, everyone has an experience in it, whether, they always heard about it versus just saw clips of it, but had no real context or weren't sure I mean, I knew this show was something when I just saw even just the edginess or the naughty moments of it. But I also knew there was just something about how everyone is framed and how it's all, again, concise editing that just gets your attention. And it's like, so I could understand why it was a hit for so long. And I think it was just another one. It's like the fans weren't always present other than, again, just message board and a few college level scholars who would pitch in. But I mean, even they did good work by talking about stuff that you don't necessarily catch right away. Like I would have totally forgotten that Jimmy Smith's Simone was, you remember him being charismatic and badass like he is in every role, but you forget, oh yeah, he is a French Portuguese mix. He's like, when he comes into the show, you're like, is he Latino? Is he Puerto Rican like Smiths is, or what? And it's like, okay, French Portuguese. Okay, that makes a little better sense. So yeah, he's a mixed cop who an all-white privileged cop Andy gets along with, and everyone gets along with Simone. But it's also kind of like you say, is like there's just so many other things that perfectly naturally complement each other, as opposed to being rough around the edges saying it was only good for this amount of time. And so here's hoping Asher Brothers podcast gets picked out. Those who listen to this episode, please weigh in. But
yeah, definitely check out NYPD Blue Balls. It's an episode for every single episode.
Great name.
It was Kyle. I will say it till the end of time. Kyle came up with the name.
I think Milch would actually tip his hat to you if
And I will say I couldn't come up with anything better, so it had to be NYPD Blue Balls. It's just too perfect. They come in pairs. It's what you get watching the show. Sometimes it makes sense.
For sure.
and we never really finished, right? So.
We're never gonna finish the show.
We're never gonna finish.
Never gonna finish.
It's all good. It'll be in the Hulu vault for a decade,
forever,
until Disney or Fox gets bought by someone else or whatever.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all being on here, and you're welcome back for any other show or movie you want to discuss. So,
all right.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. It's a good time.
Absolutely.
We'll return after these messages.
Hey, feeling down? Feeling low? Not enough podcasts about movies in your life? Why not try?
They must be destroyed on sight.
The new Podcast Cure-All, sure to get you right with the world and on a path to better living. We have exploitation, we have Italian horror, we have zombies, we have slashers, we have crime films, we have spaghetti westerns, we even have sci-fi and sex comedies. So take a dose of...
They must be destroyed on sight.
As needed, and let the hosts, Lee Russell, Daniel Harper, Paul Romali, and the odd guest host cure what ails you.
Warning, may cause atrophy, African consumption, black fever, bone shave, chin cough, colic, cramp colic, dropsy of the brain, elephantitis, grocer's itch, jaundice, mania, miasma, mortification, palsy, Pott's disease, rheumatism, scurvy, St. Anthony's fire, summer complaint, and worm fit in some people. Consult a physician before listening.
Did you ever see a film at such a young age it left you traumatized with cinematic wounds? Necrophilia. It's a dead issue, man. Don't push it. Cinema Psyops is a weekly podcast documenting an ongoing experiment on the mind of an unwilling test subject.
No one should have to watch this movie.
Oh, no one should have to watch this?
No one should have to watch this movie.
Surprisingly, it's not a topic that a lot of people really want to tackle.
I'm shocked, prudes.
I know, really.
Right?
It's the next sexual frontier that no one wants to explore.
I am, in the most sincerest of senses, disappointed in you.
It takes a powerful goddess like Connie, jam her arm down the monster's throat and kill it. Oh, I'm still tripping out over that. Even as a kid, I was like, I gotta find a girl like that. Every week, I get a new look of disappointment that I never thought I could get out of her.
Unimaginable. At 12 years old, you should not be watching this movie.
Obviously.
At 13, you should not be. 14, you shouldn't be. I'm not entirely sure even 17-year-olds should be watching this.
Just because you're offended by something doesn't mean that you have the right to demand that it doesn't exist. Watching this film again, I had all of this like little nerd glee with everything that kept
little
popping
history all popping up
absolutely.
at you.
So I totally loved this film.
Hey, I know why you couldn't see that. It's because your brain's warped from watching this shit at 12 years old.
Yeah, this is a rough movie. I told you ahead of time when we were getting ready to do it that it was.
How did you watch this shit at 12?
Because physical wounds heal, cinematic ones don't. Listen to Cinema Psyops.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey.
And I'm Zach, and we're the hosts of Podcasting After Dark, a cast dedicated to late-night horror and sci-fi of the 80s and 90s, often found on HBO and Cinemax.
You know, the movies your parents didn't want you watching as a kid. You can find us every other week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher.
This is what you want.
This is what you get.
Greetings, friends. My name is Dean Legero, and I'm the host of the 3324 podcast. I invite you to join me and my lifelong friend Eric Kuber to come with us as we discuss the music and movies that shaped our life. Each week, we'll pick an album or film that we really connect to, and not only give you some great info and trivia, but also discuss, debate, and celebrate what it means to us and the journey it took us on. We also look forward to hearing from you and giving us some of your picks for us to check out and discuss. I think it'll be a really fun experience, so come along with us for the ride. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider and at 3324.buzzsprout.com. Thanks for your time, and welcome to the 3324 family.
It's time, let's check our cue, baby. Pair it with a couple brews, baby. We love good movies. We love the bad ones too. So we watch them all and pass their lessons on to you. Oh yeah. Everything I learned from movies helps to make life a little bit groovy. Whether one likes plot holes or gratuitous movies, it's time to get busy with your friend Steve and Izzy. At eilfm.podbean.com.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up